Richard Calloway's hands trembled as he buttoned his blue shirt that Tuesday morning, his fingers brushing against the lump on his neck, the one he'd been ignoring for 6 months. In the bathroom mirror, he saw what he'd become. A 68-year-old man carrying secrets that were slowly killing him. The metal box sat on the high shelf where it had lived for 54 years, locked and silent as a grave. Downstairs, the phone rang. Cedar Falls Medical Center. Rick let it go to voicemail. "Mr. Calloway, your biopsy results are ready. We need you to come in today." His wife, Maggie, appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Rick, what biopsy?" 3 weeks until Veterans Day. 3 weeks until everything he'd buried would claw its way back to the surface. The shrapnel in his neck wasn't just metal. It was memory, shame, and a war that never really ended. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Richard "Rick" Calloway had the kind of face that told stories he never spoke aloud. At 68, his silver hair was cropped military short, and his hands bore scars from 2 wars, Vietnam and 40 years turning wrenches in his garage. The lump on the right side of his neck had started small, barely noticeable. Now it was the size of a golf ball, warm to the touch, and getting warmer. Every morning, Rick performed the same ritual. He'd stand before the bathroom mirror, reach up to touch it, then pull his hand away as if the contact burned. His blue work shirt hung on the door, freshly ironed by Maggie the night before, 46 years of marriage, and she still pressed his shirts with the care of a new bride. On the high shelf, barely visible, sat a green metal box he hadn't opened since 1970. When the radio played "The House of the Rising Sun," his jaw would clench, and he'd change the station without explanation. Rick had been an Army medic at Firebase Ripcord in 1970. He'd saved a soldier named Danny Torres by disobeying a direct order, performing field surgery under mortar fire when his captain had said to let the boy die. They'd court-martialed him for it, stripped his rank, sent him home with a general discharge that took years to upgrade. What they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that during that same firefight, shrapnel had torn into Rick's neck. He'd felt it happen, felt the hot metal pierce his skin, but he'd been too angry, too ashamed to report it. He'd thought it would heal on its own, or maybe part of him hadn't cared if it didn't. Margaret Maggie Calloway was 67, with gentle eyes that missed nothing. She'd loved Rick since high school, married him when he came back from the war, silent and haunted. She'd learned not to push, not to pry. Love, she'd decided, meant waiting until he was ready. But 3 weeks ago she'd done something she'd never done before. She'd photographed the lump on his neck with her phone while he slept. Her hands had trembled as she did it, knowing she was crossing a line, but fear had made her brave. Their daughter, Dr. Sarah Chen, was 42 and hadn't spoken to her father in 8 years. She'd taken her ex-husband's name in the marriage, kept it after the divorce, because by then it felt more hers than her father's ever had. She was a dermatological surgeon at Cedar Falls Medical Center, one of the best in 3 counties. When her marriage had ended, Rick had said she'd given up, called her weak. Sarah had learned her father's silence well. She'd never told him about the bruises, never explained why she'd really left. Now, she wore her professionalism like armor, her dark hair pulled back in a bun so tight it made her temples ache. Monday morning, October 21st, started like every other morning in the Calloway house. Rick stood before the bathroom mirror at 6:30, the ritual as familiar as breathing. His blue shirt hung on the door where Maggie had left it the night before, perfectly pressed, the creases sharp enough to cut. The calendar on the wall showed November 11th circled in red marker, Veterans Day, 3 weeks away. On the sink's edge sat a prescription bottle of pain medication. Rick picked it up, held it for a moment, then set it back down unopened. His hand drifted to his neck, fingers hovering over the lump. Today it felt different. Warmer than usual, the skin around it slightly red. Just a cyst, he muttered to himself. Old age. Nothing to worry about. But his reflection didn't look convinced. His eyes flicked to the high shelf where the metal box sat, then quickly away, as if making eye contact with it might bring something to life he'd worked 54 years to keep buried. The radio downstairs was playing morning news. Something about Veterans Day preparations. Rick whispered to his reflection. 3 more weeks. Then I'll deal with it. It wasn't clear if he meant the lump or the box. In the kitchen, sunlight poured through yellow curtains, and the smell of fresh cornbread filled the air. Maggie set a plate in front of him. Cornbread, scrambled eggs, black coffee, without a word. Rick ate mechanically, his gaze fixed on something beyond the window. Maggie watched him, her phone hidden in her apron pocket, her hand trembling slightly as she poured his coffee. Rick noticed the tremor, but said nothing. I'm fine, Mags, he said suddenly. She hadn't asked anything. The silence stretched between them like a living thing, taking up space at the table. Then the phone rang. Rick's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. The answering machine clicked on after 3 rings. Mr. Calloway, this is Cedar Falls Medical Center calling. Your biopsy results are ready, and Dr. Morrison needs to see you today. It's important. Please call us back as soon as possible. Rick's fork clattered against his plate. His face had gone pale, but he forced his expression neutral. Spam call, he said, standing abruptly. Rick Calloway. Maggie's voice was quiet but sharp as a blade. Don't you dare lie to me. He turned, caught between 46 years of her reading him like a book and a lifetime of trained silence. Maggie pulled her phone from her apron pocket, held it up. The screen showed photographs, close-ups of his neck from different angles, the lump visible and angry-looking in the harsh flash. I took these 3 weeks ago, she said. It's getting bigger. Rick's hand went to his neck involuntarily. He stared at the photos, at the evidence of what he'd been denying. You photographed me while I was sleeping? Would you have let me do it while you were awake? Her eyes were wet, but her voice steady. I've waited 46 years for you to talk to me, Rick. I'm done waiting. The fight went out of him. He sank back into his chair, shoulders slumping forward like a soldier who'd finally surrendered. Doc Morrison did a biopsy 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks? Maggie's voice cracked. And you didn't tell me? I didn't want to worry you until I knew something for sure. That's not protection, Rick. That's not love. That's just you, alone, like always. She sat down across from him, reached for his hand. We go to Dr. Morrison together. Today. I can handle it myself. Like you've handled everything yourself for 40 years? How's that working? Rick flinched as if she'd struck him. It was the first crack in his armor, small but visible. Maggie took a breath, steadied herself. And I'm calling Sarah. Rick stood so fast his chair scraped against the floor. Absolutely not. She's the best dermatological surgeon in 3 counties, and she's your daughter. She gave up on her family. I have nothing to say to her. Then listen, Maggie said, walking toward the bedroom, because she might have something to say to you. She closed the bedroom door. Rick could hear the muffled sound of her voice through the wall. He sat back down at the kitchen table, put his head in his hands. The cornbread sat untouched on his plate. Maggie's love language, cooling and forgotten. He stared at it and thought, maybe I should have told her. About everything. A long time ago. When Maggie returned, her eyes were red. Sarah will see you at 2:00 this afternoon. She's clearing her schedule. She agreed. Rick's voice was barely a whisper. I told her you needed her. She's still your daughter, Rick. His eyes welled up. He blinked fast, looked away before the tears could fall. The waiting room at Cedar Falls Medical Center smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. Rick and Maggie sat in matching chairs, hands clasped together, surrounded by paper leaf decorations and a poster advertising the upcoming Veterans Day parade. It was 1:45 in the afternoon. Other patients filled the room, mostly elderly, some reading magazines with trembling hands, others staring at nothing. Rick's knee bounced up and down in a nervous rhythm. Maggie placed her hand on it, stilling him without words. He glanced at the clock on the wall. 1:47, then 1:49, 1:52. Each time Maggie squeezed his hand a little tighter. I don't know what to say to her, Rick whispered. Start with, I'm sorry, Maggie replied. Across the room, a young father sat with his daughter, maybe 6 years old, holding her hand while they waited. The little girl looked up at her daddy and smiled. He smiled back, squeezed her hand. Rick watched them, his expression unreadable, but his eyes full of something that looked like regret. Maggie saw it too, but said nothing, just tightened her grip on his hand. At exactly 2:00, a nurse appeared at the door. Richard Calloway? Rick stood on legs that felt unsteady. The door to the examination area opened, and Dr. Sarah Chen stepped out. Both of them froze. Sarah wore a crisp white coat, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face a professional mask. But her eyes were red-rimmed as if she'd been crying recently. Rick stood with his arms at his sides, uncertain. Should he shake her hand? Hug her? He did neither. Mr. Calloway, Sarah said formally, her voice distant. Rick flinched at being called Mr. Calloway. Sarah saw the flinch, and for a split second her mask slipped. Dad, she whispered, so quietly he almost didn't hear it. Sarah. His voice cracked on her name. Maggie stepped between them and pulled Sarah into a hug. Sarah's professional composure shattered. She hugged her mother back, her shoulders shaking. Rick stood awkwardly to the side, watching, not knowing what to do with his hands. Come on, Maggie said, pulling back and looking at both of them. Both of you. We're family. She reached out, pulled Rick into the embrace. Sarah stiffened at first, then slowly, tentatively, put one arm around her father's shoulders. Sarah was the first to step back. She wiped her eyes quickly, rebuilt her professional mask. Let's go to the examination room, she said, her voice steady again. The doctor returned. She turned and walked down the hallway, her shoulders set in a defensive line. Rick followed, watching the back of his daughter's head, the military straightness of her spine. She walks like a soldier, he thought. She learned that from me. The examination room was small and bright, with the sharp smell of disinfectant. Sarah gestured to the exam table. Please sit here and remove your shirt. Rick complied, unbuttoning his shirt slowly, aware of both women watching him. Maggie took a seat in the chair by the wall. Sarah pulled on latex gloves, and Rick noticed her hands shaking slightly. You don't have to, he started. I'm your doctor, Sarah interrupted. Let me do my job. She stepped forward and placed her fingers on the lump. Rick winced. Her touch was professional but gentle. Their eyes met for a moment. "How long have you had this?" she asked. 6 months? Maybe. 6 months? Her doctor's voice slipped, and for a moment she sounded like his daughter again. "Dad, why didn't you—" She caught herself, steadied. "Why didn't you come in sooner?" Sarah pulled out a magnifying light and examined the lump closely, measuring it with calipers, 5 centimeters exactly. She took photographs, made notes on her tablet, her brow furrowing deeper with each observation. "I need to review, Doctor." "Morrison's biopsy results," she said, pulling up records on the computer mounted to the wall. Her face went pale as she scrolled through the information. "Dad, the preliminary results show this could be melanoma." Maggie gasped. Rick remained stone-faced, as if he'd expected this news all along. "Melanoma is treatable if caught early," Sarah continued. "But—" She stopped mid-sentence, scrolling back through the report. "Wait. This doesn't make sense." She leaned closer to the screen, reading more carefully. "There's a notation here about foreign material." She turned to look at Rick. "Dad, have you ever been injured here? Shrapnel? Glass? Anything?" Rick's face flashed with something. Guilt, recognition, but it vanished almost as quickly. "No, nothing I remember." Sarah studied him the way a doctor studies a patient who isn't telling the truth. The biopsy showed metal fragments embedded in the tissue. Small pieces, but definitely metal. Maggie sat forward. "Metal? From what?" "I don't know," Rick said too quickly, too defensively. "Dad?" Sarah's voice softened. "If there's foreign material in there, it could be causing chronic inflammation. That's what's making this grow and change." She paused. "I need the truth. When were you injured?" Rick stared at the floor. The silence in the room was heavy. "Rick, please," Maggie said. "Long time ago," he finally muttered. "Doesn't matter." "It matters medically," Sarah pressed. "Was this in Vietnam?" Rick's head snapped up. "How did you Because I'm reading your file. You were an Army medic. You served from 1968 to 1970. And you've never had this documented anywhere in your medical history?" Rick stood abruptly. "I'm fine. Just remove it." "It's not that simple." Sarah's voice was firm now, doctor overriding daughter. "If there's embedded shrapnel, I need to know how deep it goes, what kind of metal it is, whether it's near any critical structures like blood vessels or nerves." "I said I'm fine." Rick's voice rose. "Rick Calloway." Maggie stood up. "Sit down." Rick sat. Sarah's voice went soft, almost pleading. "Dad, I need to do a CT scan, and depending on what we find, you might need surgery. Not minor surgery, real surgery, in an operating room." She moved closer to him. "Whatever you're not telling me, it could kill you, so please, talk to me." Rick looked at his daughter, really looked at her. "I'll think about it." "Don't think too long, okay?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Rick nodded. Sarah left the room, closing the door quietly behind her. Maggie turned to Rick. "What aren't you telling us?" Rick stared at his hands. "Everything. I'm not telling you everything." The dinner Maggie had prepared that evening sat untouched on the table. It was 7 o'clock, and for the first time in 46 years of marriage, Rick and Maggie sat across from each other in complete silence. Not the comfortable kind they'd built over decades, but something cold and unfamiliar. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second marking the growing distance between them. Maggie's arms were folded across her chest. Her plate of pot roast and potatoes had gone cold. Rick hadn't even picked up his fork. "I've been patient, Rick." Her voice cut through the silence. "God knows I've been patient." Rick said nothing. "But I'm tired. I'm tired of loving someone who won't let me in." "Mags, I just—" "No." She held up her hand. "I'm talking now. You've had 46 years to talk, and you haven't. So now it's my turn." Rick closed his mouth. "I've watched you carry something," Maggie continued, her voice shaking but determined. "For 46 years I've watched you look at that metal box and flinch. I've watched you change the radio station when certain songs come on. I've watched you wake up in the middle of the night and sit in the dark. I thought if I loved you enough, if I was patient enough, you'd trust me enough to tell me. Was I wrong?" "You weren't wrong," Rick said quietly. "Then talk to me. Please." Rick stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the hallway closet, pulled out the step stool, and carried it to the living room. Maggie followed, watching as he climbed up and retrieved the green metal box from the high shelf. He set it on the coffee table between them with a heavy thunk. They both stared at it. "I know about the box," Maggie said. "You've never asked." "I was waiting for you to tell me." Rick sat down heavily on the couch. "I don't know if I can." Maggie sat beside him, not touching the box. "Try." Rick's hands were shaking. "I've had this since 1970, 54 years. And you've never opened it?" "Once, the day I came home from Vietnam. Then I locked it and swore I'd never look again." Maggie reached out, placed her hand over his. "Open it." "I can't. Can't or won't. Both." Maggie stood up. Rick's heart lurched. "Mags." She started walking toward the stairs. "Maggie, wait." She stopped, but didn't turn around. "If I open this," Rick said, his voice breaking, "everything changes." Maggie turned to face him. Tears ran down her cheeks. "Everything already changed, Rick. You just won't admit it." She went upstairs. Rick heard the bedroom door close. He sat alone in the living room, the box sitting on the table like an unexploded bomb. The house was silent, except for the ticking clock and the occasional creak of old wood settling. At midnight, Rick was still sitting in his armchair, staring at the box. A single lamp cast long shadows across the room. Upstairs, Maggie was either asleep or pretending to be. Rick stood, paced to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of whiskey, his first drink in 10 years. The liquid burned going down. He returned to the living room, sat down, and continued staring. Finally, he pulled out his wallet. Inside, tucked behind a faded photo of Maggie on their wedding day, was a small brass key. He'd carried it for 54 years, moved it from wallet to wallet, never quite able to throw it away, but never willing to use it either. He held the key in his palm, and as his fingers closed around it, his eyes shut. The memory came flooding back with such force it felt like drowning. Vietnam, June 1970, Firebase Ripcord. Rick was 22 years old, a lieutenant medic, and the monsoon rain hammered against the medical tent so hard it sounded like machine gun fire. Private Danny Torres lay on the table in front of him, 19 years old, barely conscious, a bullet lodged near his spine. Blood soaked through the gauze as fast as Rick could apply it. The radio crackled to life. "Calloway, this is Captain Hendricks. Medevac is scrubbed. Storm's too heavy. They can't fly." Rick looked at the kid on his table, Danny from Texas, who'd shown him pictures of his baby sister just yesterday, who'd talked about becoming a teacher when he got home. "Sir, he won't make it till morning without surgery." "Then he won't make it. We can't save everyone, Lieutenant. That's an order." Rick looked at Danny's face, pale and sweating. The boy's eyes found his. "Sir, please. I don't want to die." Rick picked up a scalpel. "You're not going to. Lieutenant Calloway, did you hear me? That's a direct order." "Yes, sir," Rick said. "I heard you." Then he started scrubbing in. "What did you say?" "I said no, sir. I'm not letting him die." Rick operated by flashlight and oil lamp while mortar shells exploded in the distance. Danny screamed as Rick dug for the bullet with trembling hands, but Rick kept working, kept talking to him. "Stay with me, son. Stay with me. You're going home. You're going to see your baby sister. Stay with me." He was so focused on the bullet lodged against Danny's spine that he didn't hear the incoming mortar round until it hit. The blast threw Rick sideways. He felt a sharp burning pain in his neck, but adrenaline kept him moving. He couldn't stop. Danny was still bleeding. Rick's hands shook as he extracted the bullet with forceps. He held it up to the light, misshapen, covered in blood. Then he went back to work, closing the wound, stitching layer by layer, while his own blood dripped down his neck and soaked into his collar. Danny lived. 3 hours later, military police arrested Rick in his tent. Court-martial for disobeying a direct order during combat. They stripped him of his rank, reduced him from lieutenant to sergeant, and gave him a dishonorable discharge that took him 2 years and a lawyer to upgrade to general. But the day before he left Firebase Ripcord, Danny Torres found him. The kid could barely walk, leaning on crutches, but he'd come. He pressed something into Rick's palm. "What's this?" Rick asked. "The bullet you took out of me. I had a buddy in supply wrap it in gold wire. It's yours, sir. I don't deserve it. That's why you do." Danny pulled out a green metal box. "For the bullet, and for everything else you're carrying. Don't lose it." 3 months later, an official envelope arrived at Rick's parents' house. Inside was a Silver Star Medal for conspicuous gallantry and a citation that read, "For disobeying direct orders to save the life of Private Daniel Torres under enemy fire." Rick had stared at it for an hour, then put it in the box with the bullet and locked it. He'd never told anyone, not his parents, not Maggie, not anyone. The shrapnel in his neck, the piece that hit him during the mortar blast. He'd never reported. He was too angry, too ashamed, too convinced he didn't deserve help from an army that had court-martialed him for saving a life. He'd thought it would heal on its own, or maybe he'd hoped it would just kill him quietly. Now, 54 years later, it was trying to do exactly that. Rick opened his eyes. Tears ran down his face. The first time he'd cried about Vietnam since he'd come home. He looked at the key in his palm, then at the box. He stood, walked to the coffee table, and inserted the key into the lock. His hand shook so badly he couldn't turn it. "Not tonight," he whispered. "Not yet." But he left the key in the lock. The next morning, Rick and Maggie drove to the hospital in silence. The CT scan was scheduled for 8 a.m. Rick changed into a hospital gown in a small room, and a technician positioned him on the sliding table. "Stay as still as possible for about 10 minutes, the technician said through the intercom. The machine whirred to life, and Rick slid into the tube. The enclosed space triggered something primal in him, memories of tight spaces, of bunkers, of fear. He closed his eyes and focused on breathing. In for 4 counts. Hold for 4, out for 4. The way they'd taught him in basic training. When it was over, he and Maggie sat in the waiting room again. They hadn't spoken much since last night. Rick knew he'd hurt her by not opening the box, but the words to explain why wouldn't come. I'm sorry, he finally said. I know. I wanted to open it. I just... When you're ready, Maggie said, but her voice was tired. What if I'm never ready? Then I'll open it for you. She looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before, not anger, but resignation. One way or another, Rick, those secrets are coming out. Before he could respond, Sarah appeared. Her face was pale, her expression shaken despite her professional composure. Dad, I need you to come look at something. Sarah's office was small but organized, with diplomas on the wall and a large computer monitor on her desk. She pulled up Rick's CT scans, glowing cross-sections of his neck in shades of gray and white. Rick and Maggie stared at the images, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. This is the mass, Sarah said, pointing with a pen. 5 centimeters, as we measured. She moved the pen to several bright white spots. But these are metallic fragments, 3 pieces, 1 large, 2 small. Maggie gasped softly. The large piece is lodged against your C3 vertebra, Sarah continued, her voice clinical but strained. Dad, this isn't recent shrapnel. This is old, decades old. The bone has actually grown around it. Your body encapsulated it in scar tissue. Rick said nothing, his face carved from stone. But recently something changed, Sarah said. The capsule ruptured, maybe from trauma, maybe just from time. The metal is corroding. It's releasing particles into the surrounding tissue, causing chronic inflammation. That inflammation has triggered abnormal cell growth. In English, Maggie said quietly. Sarah turned to her mother. It's not melanoma. It's a chronic foreign body reaction with dysplastic changes, like rust poisoning, but in his neck. And it's been happening for years, maybe decades. Can you fix it? Maggie asked. Sarah pulled up another image. If we don't remove the metal, the inflammation will continue. It could abscess, cause sepsis, blood infection, or the cellular changes could become malignant cancer, but removing it, she trailed off. But what? Rick's voice was rough. Sarah zoomed in on the image, showing where the large fragment sat wrapped around a blood vessel. The large piece is against your vertebra and partially wrapped around your vertebral artery. It's one of the main arteries supplying blood to your brain. If I nick that artery during removal, you could have a stroke or bleed out on the table. The room was silent, except for the hum of the computer. I need to do surgery, Sarah said. Soon, within a week. But I need to know exactly what happened, what kind of metal this is, how it got there. Because if it's contaminated with anything, chemicals, biological agents from the war, I need to know before I cut. Rick remained silent. Dad, please. Sarah's voice cracked. I can't save you if you won't help me. Rick finally spoke. It's shrapnel. From? Vietnam. 1970. And you never had it removed? Never reported it? I didn't know it was there, Rick said. It was a lie, but not a complete one. Sarah didn't believe him. He could see it in her eyes. But she didn't push. Fine. I'll prep for surgery. Friday, October 25th. 3 days from now. She pulled up one more image. Dad, there's something else. This inflammatory mass is putting pressure on nerve bundles. You must be in constant pain. It's manageable. You've been in pain for how long? Months? Years? Tears formed in Sarah's eyes. Doesn't matter. It matters to me. Sarah's professional mask shattered completely. Don't you understand? You've been suffering, and you didn't tell anyone. You just suffered alone. Rick looked at his daughter, really looked at her. He saw himself in her stubbornness, her strength, her inability to ask for help. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." Sarah broke down, covering her face with her hands. "Don't die on me. Please don't die before I can know you." Rick stood and pulled her into a hug, the first in 8 years. Sarah sobbed into his shoulder and he held her tight. "I won't. I promise." The evening before surgery, October 24th, felt like the last normal moment Rick might ever have. He sat in the living room with Maggie beside him, the green metal box on the coffee table between them. The key was still in the lock, where he'd left it 2 nights ago. "If something happens tomorrow," Rick started. "Nothing will happen," Maggie interrupted firmly. "But if it does—" "Rick. Please, Mags. Let me say this." Maggie pressed her lips together and nodded. "If I don't make it," Rick said slowly, "open the box. There's a bullet in there wrapped in gold wire, and a letter I never read, and a medal, a silver star, that I never claimed." Maggie's eyes widened. "You have a silver star?" Rick nodded. "For saving Danny Torres, for disobeying orders." He stared at the box. "I never wore it, never even took it out. I felt like I didn't deserve it." "You saved a life and they gave you a medal," Maggie said. "Why wouldn't you deserve it?" "Because I was angry when I did it. I disobeyed orders not just to save Danny, but because I was sick of watching kids die for nothing. I was selfish. I wanted to prove my captain wrong. You were brave. I was 22, and stupid, and angry." Maggie took his hand. "You were a hero. You just never let yourself believe it." Before Rick could respond, his cell phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number. Rick almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hello? Is this Sergeant Richard Calloway?" The voice was male, middle-aged, unfamiliar. Rick's whole body tensed. "Yes. My name is Michael Torres. Danny Torres was my father." Rick couldn't breathe. The room tilted. Maggie grabbed his arm, steadying him. "Mr. Calloway? Are you there?" "I'm here," Rick managed. "My father passed away in 2010, cancer, but he lived." Michael's voice was thick with emotion. "He lived because of you. He came home, married my mother, had 3 kids, me and my 2 sisters. He saw his grandchildren. 30 years he wouldn't have had." Rick's vision blurred with tears. "I'm so sorry he's gone." "I've been trying to find you for years," Michael continued. "Dad talked about you every single day. The medic who saved me. He always wanted to thank you properly, but you disappeared after the war. I finally tracked you down through the VA database, and then I heard you're having surgery tomorrow." "How did you—" "I called the hospital. I'm a doctor, too. Emergency medicine in Houston. They told me you were scheduled for a procedure." Michael paused. "I need you to know something. Dad wrote you a letter in 1972. Did you ever get it?" Rick looked at the box, at the key waiting in the lock. I don't know. Maybe. He sent it to your last known address. He wanted you to know what your courage meant to him." Michael's voice cracked. "Can I tell you what happened to him after Vietnam?" "Please," Rick whispered. "Dad went back to Texas. He was in a wheelchair for 6 months, then on crutches for another year, but he healed. He used his GI Bill to go to college, became a history teacher. He coached high school football for 35 years. Do you know how many kids he influenced? Hundreds, maybe thousands. He used to tell them about you, about the medic who broke the rules to do what was right." Rick was openly crying now. "I thought I ruined his life. The court-martial, the discharge, everything that happened after. You gave him a life, Michael said firmly. That's all he ever wanted you to know. You gave him a life, and he spent it making sure other kids survived, too. All because you didn't follow orders. Rick covered his face with his free hand, his shoulders shaking. Maggie wrapped her arms around him. I wish I'd known, Rick said through tears. I wish I'd read his letter. You know now. You know. And Dad, wherever he is, he'd want you to fight tomorrow. Fight like you fought for him. I will. Sergeant Calloway? Michael's voice softened. Thank you. From all of us. My mother, my sisters, my children. Thank you for giving us the man we loved. After the call ended, Rick sat holding the phone, staring at nothing. Maggie held him while he cried, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere buried for 54 years. I thought I destroyed his life, Rick finally said. No, love, you saved it. Rick looked at the box. Maybe I should read that letter. After surgery, Maggie said firmly. Read it after you come home. Promise me something, Mags. If I don't make it, you'll make it, and you'll read it yourself. Dawn came too quickly. Rick woke at 5 a.m. to find Maggie already awake beside him. They lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hands clasped between them. Remember our wedding day? Maggie asked softly. You wore your mother's dress, the white one with lace sleeves. And you wore your uniform. You looked so young. I look like a kid playing soldier, Rick said. You look like my hero. Maggie turned her head to look at him. Come back to me. Always. They arrived at Cedar Falls Medical Center at 6 a.m. The surgical wing was quiet, just beginning to wake up. Sarah was already there, waiting in scrubs, her hair pulled back, her face pale but determined. Rick changed into a hospital gown in a small prep room. Maggie helped him tie the back, her fingers trembling on the strings. They didn't talk. There was nothing left to say that hadn't been said. In the pre-op room, a nurse inserted an IV into Rick's hand. Monitors were attached to his chest, beeping steadily. Sarah came in with a clipboard, reviewing consent forms one last time. There are risks, she said, her doctor voice firmly in place. Stroke, paralysis, bleeding. The artery is in a very dangerous position. I understand, Rick said. I'll be careful, I promise. I know you will, sweetheart. The anesthesiologist appeared in the doorway. We're ready for you, Dr. Chan. This was it. The moment. Sarah looked at her father, and for a second, the professional mask slipped completely. Maggie leaned down and kissed Rick. I love you. I love you. 46 years, Mags. Best years of my life. Sarah wiped her eyes behind her surgical mask. Rick reached out and took her hand. I'm proud of you, he said. I always have been. I should have said it 8 years ago. I'm saying it now. Dad? Sarah's voice broke. I'll see you when I wake up. You better. Sarah squeezed his hand, then let go. The orderly began wheeling Rick's gurney toward the surgical suite. Rick raised his hand to Maggie, and she blew him a kiss. Then the double doors swung shut between them. Maggie and Sarah stood alone in the hallway. For the first time in 8 years, they were truly alone together. Sarah was still in her scrubs, supposed to be heading to the operating room to prepare, but she hesitated. I should go, Sarah said. I need to scrub in. Wait. Maggie touched her daughter's arm. Sarah stopped. Why did you really leave Mark? Maggie asked gently. Sarah's eyes widened. Dad told you? I guessed. A mother knows. Sarah looked at the floor. I can't talk about this right now. I need to focus. Just tell me, please. Sarah took a shaky breath. He hit me. First time on our anniversary. Last time the day before I left. I stayed 3 years too long because I kept thinking I could fix it. Fix him, fix us. But you can't fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed. Maggie pulled Sarah into her arms. Oh, honey. I didn't tell Dad because he always said a Chen doesn't give up on family. I thought he'd be ashamed of me. He thought you gave up easily. You thought he'd judge you. Maggie pulled back, held Sarah's face in her hands. Both of you too stubborn to just talk. He taught me silence, Sarah said. I learned well. Then unlearn it, together. After you save your father. Sarah nodded, wiped her eyes. I have to go. Surgery starts in 20 minutes. Bring him back to me. I'll bring him back to both of us. Sarah squeezed her mother's hand, then turned and walked toward the surgical suite. Maggie returned to the waiting room. She sat in an uncomfortable chair, pulled out a rosary she hadn't used in years, and began to pray. Not because she was particularly religious, but because she needed something to hold on to. Around her, other families waited for their own loved ones. An elderly woman in the next chair noticed her distress. Who are you waiting for, dear? My husband, Maggie said. Neck surgery, shrapnel removal. My late husband had the same thing, the woman said. Shrapnel from Korea. The surgery took 4 hours, but he came through fine. Lived another 30 years. Stubborn old goat. She smiled sadly. Maggie managed a small smile. That sounds like my Rick. Minutes crawled by. 8 o'clock, 8:30, 9. A nurse came out once to update her. There were some complications during the procedure, but he's stable. Dr. Chen will update you when she's finished. Complications. The word echoed in Maggie's mind. What kind of complications? But the nurse had already moved on to another family. Maggie sat back down, clutched her rosary tighter, and whispered to the empty air. Come back to me, Rick. Please come back. In the operating room, bright lights blazed down on Rick's unconscious form. The surgical team moved with practiced efficiency around the table. Nurses, an anesthesiologist, a surgical assistant, and Sarah, who stood at the head of the table, scalpel in hand. Scalpel, she said, and the instrument was placed in her palm. She made the first incision, clean, precise, following the line she'd marked earlier. Blood welled up, but suction cleared it immediately. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled. Retractors. The team moved like a choreographed dance. Metal instruments held the incision open, exposing the layers of tissue beneath. Sarah worked methodically, separating muscle, identifying structures, searching for the foreign material that had been poisoning her father for 54 years. It's more extensive than the CT showed, Sarah said, her voice tight. The mass was larger, angrier, more inflamed than she'd expected. We're going to need more time. Someone notify the waiting room. Add at least an hour to the estimate. She continued dissecting carefully through inflamed tissue. Finally, she found the first small piece of shrapnel, a jagged fragment no bigger than a grain of rice. She extracted it with forceps and dropped it into a specimen container. One down. Minutes later, she found the second small piece and removed it the same way. 2 down. Then she reached the large piece, and her breath caught. It was wrapped partially around the vertebral artery, exactly as the CT had shown. The pulsing blood vessel was so close that Sarah could see it moving with each heartbeat. One slip, 1 millimeter too far, and her father would stroke out or bleed to death on the table. "This is it," she said quietly. "The big one." The room fell silent, except for the beep of monitors and the hiss of the ventilator. Even the surgical assistant seemed to be holding his breath. Sarah picked up smaller, more delicate instruments. Starting extraction, she began to tease the metal free from the scar tissue that had encapsulated it, working millimeter by millimeter. Her world narrowed to this one small space, this one critical task. Nothing existed except her hands, the instruments, and the shrapnel that had to come out without destroying everything around it. Suddenly, blood spurted from a small vessel she'd nicked. "Bleeder!" Sarah's heart hammered, but her hands remained steady. The team moved instantly. Suction cleared the blood. Cautery sealed the vessel, but Rick's blood pressure dropped on the monitor. "BP 90/60, the anesthesiologist called out. "Give him fluids," Sarah ordered. "We keep moving." As she lifted the large piece of shrapnel, a pocket of pus ruptured beneath it. The smell hit everyone in the room, the thick, sour stench of old infection. Sarah's stomach turned, but she kept working. "Suction. I need irrigation." The team flushed the wound with sterile saline, washing away decades of accumulated infection. The abscess cavity was much larger than the imaging had suggested. How had her father functioned with this much chronic infection? How had he lived with the constant pain and never said a word? "He's been in agony," Sarah said aloud, though she was talking more to herself than the team. "For years, and he never told anyone." She continued working, draining the abscess, debriding dead tissue. She was so focused that she didn't immediately notice the alarm from the monitoring equipment. "BP dropping," the anesthesiologist said urgently. 70/40. Sarah looked up and saw it. A small tear in the vertebral artery, blood seeping steadily into the surgical field. "I need vascular now!" Sarah's voice was sharp but controlled. "Dr. Winters is in another surgery," a nurse replied. "Then I fix it myself." Sarah's hands were shaking for the first time. She could feel it, the tremor in her fingers, the cold sweat on her forehead under the surgical cap. 6-0 Proline suture. Now. The scrub nurse placed the needle holder in Sarah's hand. Sarah took one deep breath, forced her hands to steady. She'd trained for this. She could do this. She had to do this. This was her father. She placed the first tiny suture in the torn artery, then the second, then the third. Each one had to be perfect, tight enough to stop the bleeding, but not so tight it narrowed the vessel. The monitor beeped. Rick's blood pressure stabilized. 75, 80, 85. "There," Sarah breathed. "Holding." She gently freed the final portion of shrapnel from the tissue and lifted it out. The piece was larger than she'd expected, about the size of a dime, jagged and corroded, covered in tissue and old blood. She held it up to the light, staring at this small piece of metal that had almost killed her father. "Bag and tag for pathology," she said quietly. "And someone take a photo. Dad will want to see what almost killed him." With the shrapnel removed, Sarah methodically checked the wound. No more bleeding, no more foreign material. The abscess cavity was clean. She irrigated thoroughly one more time, then began the careful process of closing, layer by layer. "He's clear," she finally said. "Let's close." By the time Sarah placed the final stitch in Rick's skin, it was 11:30 in the morning, 4.5 hours total. She stepped back from the table, her legs suddenly weak. "Good work, team," she said. The scrub nurse smiled behind her mask. "Nice work, doctor." Rick was wheeled to the recovery room, still intubated with a breathing tube. Monitors showed stable vital signs. Sarah pulled off her gloves and mask in the scrub room. Alone for the first time since the surgery began, she braced her hands against the sink and let out a shaking breath. "I almost lost him," she whispered to her reflection. "I almost killed my own father." The tears came then, tears of relief, exhaustion, and fear. She'd done it, but it had been so close. Too close. She washed her face with cold water, composed herself, and went to find her mother. Maggie jumped up the moment Sarah appeared in the waiting room doorway. "How is he?" "He's alive." Sarah managed a tired smile. "Surgery was successful." Maggie crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled Sarah into a fierce hug. "Thank you. Thank you." Sarah hugged her mother back, then gently extracted herself. "He's not awake yet, and there were complications. We need to talk." She led Maggie to a private consultation room and closed the door. There was more damage than we expected. The shrapnel was embedded deep, and it had caused a significant abscess. During the extraction, a small blood vessel tore. Maggie's hand went to her mouth. "I repaired it," Sarah said quickly, "but he lost some blood." "His vitals are stable now, but he'll need to stay in ICU for at least 24 to 48 hours. The next day is critical." "But he'll be okay?" "I think so. I hope so. But, Mom, the infection was extensive. He must have been in constant pain for months, maybe years, and he never said a word." Maggie closed her eyes. "That's your father, silent to the end." Sarah pulled out her tablet and showed Maggie the photos of the removed shrapnel. 3 pieces, dark and corroded, sitting in a specimen container. "This is what was inside him. So small, but so much damage." Maggie stared at the images. "Can I see him?" "In about an hour, when he's settled in ICU. He won't be awake. Probably won't wake until tomorrow morning, but you can sit with him." "I need to be there when he wakes up." "I know. I'll check on him every hour." Sarah hesitated. "Mom, I was so scared in there." Maggie took her daughter's hands. "But you did it. You saved him." "We're not done yet," Sarah said. "He still has to wake up, and he still has to heal." That night, Maggie sat in a chair beside Rick's ICU bed. Tubes and wires connected him to machines that beeped and hissed rhythmically. His neck was bandaged, his face pale, but his chest rose and fell steadily with each breath. Maggie held his hand and whispered to him even though he couldn't hear. "You made it through, just like you always do. Now you have to come back to me. You promised." Sarah checked in at midnight, found her mother still awake, still holding Rick's hand. She didn't try to send Maggie home. Instead, she brought her a blanket and a pillow. "Get some rest, Mom. I'll wake you if anything changes." But Maggie didn't sleep. She sat vigil through the night, watching the monitors, listening to the steady beep of her husband's heartbeat, and waiting for dawn. October 26th, 4 o'clock in the morning. The ICU was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the soft hiss of ventilators. Rick's eyes fluttered open, then closed, then opened again. The ceiling above him was white and unfamiliar. He tried to move his head and felt the pull of bandages, the ache of healing tissue. Beside him, Maggie was asleep in a chair, her head resting on the edge of his bed, one hand still holding his. The sight of her there, exhausted, faithful, present, made his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry, raw from the breathing tube they'd removed hours earlier. No sound came out. He moved his hand slightly, and the motion was enough. Maggie's eyes opened immediately. "Rick?" She sat up, fully awake in an instant. "Oh, Rick, you're awake." She leaned over him, cupped his face in her hands, kissed his forehead. Rick tried again to speak, managed only a croak. "Don't try to talk yet. Let me get the nurse." Maggie pressed the call button. A nurse appeared within seconds. "Welcome back, Mr. Calloway." She checked his vital signs, adjusted his IV, and brought him ice chips instead of water. "Just these for now. Small amounts." Rick let the ice melt on his tongue, the cold relief spreading through his parched mouth. His hand went automatically to his neck, felt the thick bandage there. "The surgery?" he managed to rasp out. "Successful," Maggie said, her voice breaking with relief. "Sarah got it all out. You've been unconscious for 10 hours. "Sarah." Rick's voice was barely a whisper. "She saved you." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "Your daughter saved your life." Rick tried to sit up. Pain lanced through his neck, and Maggie gently pressed him back down. "Stay still. You need to rest." "I need to tell you something." Rick's words came slowly, each one an effort. "Before I lose courage again." "Rick, you just had major surgery." "No, now." He gripped her hand with surprising strength. "The shrapnel. I knew it was there." Maggie went very still. "What?" "I felt it happen. In Vietnam. 1970. When I was operating on Danny Torres, a mortar hit the tent. I felt the shrapnel hit my neck. But I kept working. I had to save him. Rick, I never reported it. Never told anyone. I was angry. So angry at the Army for court-martialing me. I thought if I ignored it, it would heal on its own. Or maybe—" His voice dropped to a whisper. "Maybe I didn't care if it didn't." Maggie's tears fell freely now. 54 years. 54 years you carried that pain. "I deserved it," Rick said. "No." Maggie's voice was fierce. "You didn't. You saved a life. You were a hero. I broke the rules. You broke the rules to do the right thing. There's a difference." Maggie leaned closer. "The box. There's more in the box, isn't there?" Rick nodded slightly. "Yes, and I'm ready. When I'm stronger, I'll tell you everything. No more secrets." Before Maggie could respond, the door opened and Sarah walked in. She'd changed out of her scrubs into regular clothes, but her hair was still pulled back, her face showing the exhaustion of the long surgery and sleepless night. "Dad, you're awake." She hurried to the bedside. Rick looked at his daughter and saw the fear in her eyes, the relief, the love she'd been hiding behind professionalism for 8 years. "Thank you," he said hoarsely, "for saving me. Thank you for letting me." Sarah's voice trembled. Rick reached out his hand and Sarah took it. "I'm sorry. For 8 years. For everything I said about your divorce, about Mark, about you giving up. I'm sorry, too. I should have told you." "No." Rick squeezed her hand. "I should have asked. I should have listened." He paused, gathering strength. "Your mother told me. About Mark. About what he did." Sarah's face crumpled. She'd never intended for him to know, had planned to take that secret to her grave just like he'd planned to take his. "I was wrong," Rick continued. "You didn't give up. You were brave. You left someone who was hurting you. That takes more courage than I ever had." Sarah couldn't hold back her tears anymore. "Dad, come here, sweetheart." Rick opened his arms, and Sarah leaned down carefully, mindful of his bandages. He held his daughter for the first time in 8 years, and they both cried, for the lost time, for the words unsaid, for the silence that had kept them apart. When Sarah pulled back, she wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. "I need to check your incision." Her doctor voice returned, but softer now, gentler. She carefully peeled back the edge of the bandage, examined the wound, nodded with satisfaction. "Healing beautifully, no signs of infection. You're going to have a scar, but it'll be small." "I can live with that," Rick said. "I've earned it." The hours passed slowly in the ICU. Rick drifted in and out of sleep, and each time he woke, either Maggie or Sarah was there. Sometimes both. They talked in low voices about everything and nothing, the weather, the hospital food, the nurses, carefully avoiding anything too heavy. There would be time for the rest later. That evening, Rick's cell phone, which Maggie had brought from home, rang. She answered it, then held it up to Rick's ear since he was too weak to hold it himself. "Hello?" Rick's voice was stronger now, though still rough. "Sergeant Calloway? It's Michael Torres. I heard the surgery was successful." Rick's face softened. "Michael." "Yes. Your timing yesterday, that call before surgery, it meant everything. I wanted you to go in knowing that what you did mattered, that it still matters." Michael paused. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck, but I'm alive." "My family wants to come visit you. Is that okay? We're in town for a few days." Rick looked at Maggie, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd like that very much." "We'll come by tomorrow if the doctors allow it. Rest now, sir." After the call ended, Rick closed his eyes, but he was smiling. 2 days later, October 28th, Rick was moved from ICU to a regular hospital room. The danger had passed. His incision was healing cleanly, his pain was manageable with medication, and he was starting physical therapy, simple neck exercises to maintain range of motion. Dr. James Morrison, Rick's old friend and family physician, came to visit. He stood in the doorway, shaking his head. "You stubborn idiot. You could have told me it was shrapnel. I would have referred you to Sarah months ago." "I was ashamed," Rick admitted. He was sitting up in bed now, looking more like himself despite the bandages. Morrison pulled up a chair. "Ashamed of what? Being a hero?" "Ashamed that I let it sit there for 54 years. Ashamed that I was too proud to ask for help." "Well, you ask now. That's what matters." Morrison smiled. "Sarah did excellent work. Best surgeon in 3 counties. You're lucky she's your daughter." "I know." Later that afternoon there was a knock on the door. Maggie opened it to find a man in his 50s with kind eyes and his father's smile. Behind him stood a woman and 3 younger adults. "Mr. Calloway?" the man said. "I'm Michael Torres." Rick's eyes filled with tears. "Come in. Please. All of you." The Torres family filed into the room, Michael, his wife Elena, and their 3 adult children. Michael approached the bed and extended his hand. Rick took it, then pulled Michael into an awkward one-armed hug. "Your father saved my life," Rick said. "No, sir. You saved his." They talked for an hour. Michael told stories about his father, Danny, the teacher, the coach, the man who'd influenced hundreds of students over 35 years. He showed Rick photos on his phone, Danny with his family, Danny at his retirement party, Danny holding his first grandchild. "This is your legacy," Michael said, gesturing to his family. "All of us. We exist because of what you did." The youngest of Michael's children, a woman in her 20s, spoke up. "Grandpa Danny told us about you every year on Veterans Day. He said you taught him what real courage was, not following orders, but following your conscience." Rick couldn't speak. He just nodded, overwhelmed. Before they left, Michael handed Rick a small package. "Dad wanted you to have this. We've been carrying it for years, waiting to find you." Inside was a photo. Danny Torres in his late 40s, standing in front of a high school with a sign that read, "Teacher of the Year, 1989. On the back, in Danny's handwriting, "For Sergeant Calloway, the man who gave me this life. Thank you will never be enough." That evening, after the Torres family had left, Rick sat alone with Maggie. The hospital room was quiet, the sun setting outside the window, casting golden light across the walls. "I'm ready," Rick said. "Ready for what?" "To open the box, to read the letter, to stop hiding." He looked at Maggie. "Will you bring it tomorrow?" Maggie smiled through tears. "I'll bring it." "And Maggie, I'm sorry for all of it, for every secret, every silence, every time I shut you out." "I know you are." She took his hand. "Now we move forward. Together." "Together," Rick agreed. The next morning, October 29th, Maggie arrived with the green metal box. She set it on the tray table beside Rick's bed. The key was still in the lock where Rick had left it almost a week ago, a lifetime ago. Rick stared at it for a long moment. Sarah was there too, standing by the window, giving him space but offering silent support. 54 years, Rick said. "I've been terrified of this box for 54 years. "It's just a box," Maggie said gently. "It can't hurt you." "It's not the box I'm afraid of. It's what's inside, the proof that I was wrong, that I wasted all this time being ashamed of something I should have been proud of." "Then stop wasting time," Sarah said from the window. "Open it." Rick reached out with a hand that shook only slightly. He turned the key. The lock clicked. He lifted the lid. Inside, exactly as he'd left it in 1970, were 3 items: a gold-wrapped bullet, a sealed envelope yellowed with age, and a blue velvet box containing a Silver Star medal. Rick lifted out the bullet first. It was heavier than he remembered, the gold wire tarnished but still intact. He turned it over in his palm and saw engraving he'd never noticed before. "Richard Calloway. The bullet you stopped." Tears rolled down his cheeks. "This was inside Danny," he told them. "I took it out of him, and he gave it back to me." Next, he opened the metal case. The Silver Star gleamed against its blue velvet backing, the ribbon still crisp and new because it had never been worn. The citation was tucked beneath it. Sarah read it aloud. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against the enemy while serving as a medical officer with Company B, Lieutenant Calloway, with complete disregard for his own safety and in direct disobedience of orders, performed life-saving surgery on Private Daniel Torres under enemy mortar fire, thereby saving Private Torres's life. His actions reflect great credit upon himself and uphold the highest traditions of military service." "You were decorated," Maggie said softly. "And you never told anyone. I didn't feel like I deserved it." "But you did," Sarah said. "You do." Finally, Rick picked up the envelope. His name was written on the front in careful handwriting. Lieutenant Richard Calloway. His hands trembled as he broke the seal, 52 years old, but it opened cleanly. "Do you want me to read it?" Maggie asked. Rick nodded, unable to speak. He handed her the letter. Maggie unfolded the pages and began to read aloud. Maggie's voice was steady as she read, but tears streamed down her face. "Dear Lieutenant Calloway, I'm writing this from home in Texas. It's been 2 years since that night at Firebase Ripcord, and I'm finally able to find the words to say what I should have said then. I'm alive because of you. I'm walking because of you. I got married last month to a wonderful woman named Maria. We're expecting our first child in the spring. All of this, every moment I have from now until I die, exists because you refuse to let me go. I heard they court-martialed you for saving me. I heard they stripped your rank and sent you home in disgrace. I'm so sorry. You saved my life and they punished you for it. That's not right. That will never be right. But I want you to know something that maybe nobody else has told you. You're a hero. You're my hero, my family's hero, my future children's hero. You didn't follow orders that night. You followed your conscience. You looked at a scared kid from Texas and saw someone worth saving, someone worth fighting for, even when your commanding officer said to let me die. That takes a different kind of courage than charging into battle. It takes the courage to stand alone, to do what's right, even when everyone tells you you're wrong. I'm going to live my life in a way that honors what you gave me. I'm going to be a teacher. I want to work with kids, help them find their way, the way you helped me find mine. I want to spend the rest of my life making sure that other people survive too, just like you made sure I survived. Every student I teach, every life I touch, that's because of you. Thank you doesn't seem like enough, but thank you. Thank you for my life. Thank you for my future. Thank you for seeing me as someone worth saving. You're the bravest man I've ever known, and I will carry what you did for me every single day until I die. With eternal gratitude, Sergeant Daniel Torres. P.S. The bullet is yours. You stopped it with your courage. Keep it as a reminder. You saved me. Don't ever forget that. Don't ever doubt that it mattered. It mattered more than anything. The room was silent except for the sound of 3 people crying. Rick covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs that came from a place deeper than words. 54 years of shame, of guilt, of believing he'd destroyed a man's life, all of it dissolved in the truth Danny had written so long ago. "I didn't know," Rick said through his tears. "I thought he hated me. I thought I'd ruined everything." Maggie set the letter down and wrapped her arms around her husband. "He loved you. He always did." Sarah came to the bedside, placed her hand on her father's shoulder. "You saved him, Dad. And he went on to save hundreds of others. That's your legacy." "I wasted so much time," Rick whispered. 54 years being ashamed of the best thing I ever did. "You're not wasting any more," Sarah said firmly. "Starting now." Over the next week, Rick healed. By October 31st, his stitches were ready to come out, his range of motion was improving, and the doctors cleared him to go home. Sarah removed the stitches herself in his hospital room, her touch gentle and professional. "Beautiful healing," she said, examining the incision site. "You'll have a scar, but it'll fade over time." "I can live with a scar," Rick said. "It's honest." That afternoon, Sarah drove her parents home. Rick sat in the passenger seat wearing the blue shirt Maggie had ironed. It felt like a lifetime ago. When they pulled into the driveway of the house he'd lived in for 40 years, it looked different somehow, brighter, more welcoming. Inside, the metal box sat on the living room shelf. Open now, its contents displayed, the gold-wrapped bullet in a small glass case, Danny's letter in a simple frame, the Silver Star medal mounted on the wall beside Rick's old Army photo. Rick stopped in front of the display and stared at it. Feels strange, he said. Having it out in the open? Feels right, Maggie corrected. Over the following days, Rick grew stronger. Sarah came for dinner on November 3rd, the first family dinner in 8 years. Maggie cooked all of Rick's favorites: pot roast, mashed potatoes, cornbread, green beans. They sat around the dining table and talked, really talked, sharing stories and laughter and the comfortable silences that come with genuine connection. I forgot what this felt like, Sarah said, setting down her fork. What? Rick asked. Family. She looked at both of her parents. I forgot what it felt like to belong. Rick reached across the table and took her hand. You always belonged. I just forgot how to show you. We're going to do this more often, Maggie announced. Every week. Sunday dinners, no excuses. Promise? Sarah asked. Promise? Rick said. On November 8th, Rick received another call from Michael Torres. My mother wants to speak with you, Michael said. Is that okay? Of course. The phone was handed over, and an elderly woman's voice came on the line. Mr. Calloway? This is Maria Torres, Danny's wife. Mrs. Torres. Rick sat up straighter, suddenly nervous. I'm honored to speak with you. I wanted to thank you for giving me my husband, Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. We had 38 years together because of you. We raised 3 children. We grew old together. I got to hold his hand when he died. All of that happened because you refused to follow orders. Rick's throat was tight. He was a good man. He was. And he became a good man because you gave him the chance to become one. He talked about you every Veterans Day. He'd stand at the window and look east toward Iowa and say, I wonder what the lieutenant is doing today. I hope he knows what he gave me. I know now, Rick said. I finally know. Then my job is done. Live well, Mr. Calloway. Live the life Danny wanted you to have. A life without shame, without regret. You earned it. After the call, Rick sat in his armchair staring at the memorial on the wall. Maggie found him there an hour later. What are you thinking about? She asked. Veterans Day, Rick said. It's in 3 days. I've avoided the parade for 20 years, but I think I want to go this year. Then we'll go, Maggie said simply. Will you help me with something? Rick stood and walked to the bedroom closet. From the back, behind years of accumulated clothes, he pulled out his old Army dress uniform. It was wrapped in plastic, untouched since 1970. I want to wear this. With the medal. Maggie smiled through tears. You'll look handsome. On the morning of November 11th, Rick stood before the bathroom mirror in his dress blues. The uniform still fit, though it was snug in places it hadn't been 54 years ago. Maggie helped him pin the silver star to his chest. Its first time being worn. Rick stared at his reflection, an old soldier, finally at peace. Ready? Maggie asked. Ready. Sarah met them at the town square where the Veterans Day parade was assembling. Veterans from every conflict gathered: World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan. Rick saw faces he recognized, men he'd served with, men who'd avoided him after his court-martial. Now they noticed his silver star and approached with new respect. Calloway, I didn't know you had a silver star. Just started wearing it, Rick said. The parade began at 10 o'clock. Rick marched with the other Vietnam veterans, shoulder to shoulder with men who'd shared his war. The crowd lining Main Street cheered and waved flags. Children held signs. Thank you for your service. Rick's eyes filled with tears, but he kept marching, kept his head high. At the town square, there was a ceremony. The mayor spoke. A bugler played taps. Then, unexpectedly, the mayor called Rick's name. "Sergeant Richard Calloway, would you please come to the podium?" Rick froze. Maggie nudged him forward. "Go on." Rick walked to the podium on unsteady legs. The mayor shook his hand. "Sergeant Calloway has agreed to say a few words." Rick hadn't prepared anything. He stood at the microphone, looking out at hundreds of faces, his neighbors, his community, strangers who'd come to honor veterans. In the front row, he saw Maggie, Sarah, and Michael Torres with his entire family. "I wasn't going to speak today," Rick began, his voice rough. "I'm not good with words. I've spent 54 years being silent about what happened in Vietnam. I thought silence was strength. I was wrong." He gripped the podium. "In 1970, I disobeyed a direct order. I performed surgery on a dying soldier when my captain told me to let him die. They court-martialed me for it. I spent 54 years believing I'd done something wrong, something shameful. But I saved a life that night. Private Danny Torres went on to become a teacher, a father, a grandfather. He touched hundreds of lives because I made one choice." Rick pointed to the Torres family. "That family exists because I refused to follow an order I knew was wrong. So today I want to say something to all veterans here who carry burdens in silence. Talk. Open up. Let people help you. The shame isn't in asking for help. The shame is in suffering alone." His voice broke. "I carried shrapnel in my neck for 54 years because I was too proud to ask for help. It almost killed me. My daughter, Dr. Sarah Chen, saved my life 3 weeks ago. She removed the shrapnel I'd been carrying since that night in Vietnam. And when it came out, something else came out too. The shame, the guilt, the silence." He looked directly at Sarah. "Thank you. And thank you to everyone who refuses to give up on people like me. People who've forgotten how to ask for help. People who've been silent so long they've forgotten how to speak." The crowd stood and applauded. Rick stepped down from the podium, and Sarah met him at the bottom of the steps. She threw her arms around him, and he held her tight. After the ceremony, the Torres family approached. The youngest grandchild, a girl of 6, looked up at Rick with wide eyes. "Are you the hero my great-grandpa always talked about?" Rick knelt down to her level. "Your great-grandpa was the hero, sweetheart. I was just a medic. Grandpa Mike says you're the bravest man who ever lived." Rick's eyes filled with tears again. "Your great-grandpa gave me a great gift. He taught me that doing the right thing is more important than following rules." That evening, Rick, Maggie, and Sarah sat together on the front porch of the Calloway house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Autumn leaves drifted down from the trees. Maggie had brought out coffee and cornbread, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the day end. "Make hay while the sun shines," Maggie said softly, repeating the old saying she'd used for years. Rick smiled. "I'm finally listening." "So, what happens now?" Sarah asked. Rick reached over and took both women's hands, his wife on one side, his daughter on the other. "Now we live, really live, together. No more secrets, no more silence. Just this." "Just this," Maggie agreed. They sat as darkness fell and the first stars appeared. Inside the house, through the window, the silver star caught the last rays of sunlight and gleamed. The metal box sat open on the shelf, no longer a tomb for secrets, but a testament to courage. The letter from Danny Torres, framed and visible, bore witness to a life saved and a legacy honored. Rick closed his eyes and breathed deeply. For the first time in 54 years, he felt the weight lift completely. The shrapnel was gone. The shame was gone. The silence was broken. He was home. Finally, truly home. And that was enough. The end. For 54 years, Rick Calloway carried a secret that was killing him, literally. A piece of shrapnel from Vietnam buried in his neck, silent and deadly. But the metal wasn't the real problem. It was the shame he wrapped around it, the belief that saving a life by breaking the rules made him a failure instead of a hero. How many of us carry our own shrapnel? Not metal, but memories. Not wounds we can see, but burdens we carry alone, because we think asking for help means we're weak. Rick learned the hardest lesson. Silence doesn't protect the people we love. It pushes them away. His daughter became a surgeon and saved his life, but only after 8 years of painful distance. His wife waited 46 years for him to open up. The greatest courage isn't in staying strong alone. It's in finally letting people in. Rick's story asks us all, what are you carrying that you don't have to carry alone? When he finally opened that locked box after 54 years, he didn't find shame. He found proof he'd always been worthy of love. Are you still carrying something that's slowly poisoning you? What would happen if you finally let it go? Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear your story.